In the summer of 1944, the skies over Europe became a battleground for not just nations, but also ideologies. As Allied forces pushed deeper into Axis territory, a group of pilots soared through the clouds, their resolve unyielding. They were the Tuskegee Airmen, the first African-American military aviators in the United States Armed Forces, and their reputation was beginning to strike fear into the hearts of their adversaries, especially the German pilots. The Tuskegee Airmen had proven their mettle against the odds, overcoming a history of discrimination and skepticism from their own military. Initially relegated to outdated aircraft and faced with relentless scrutiny, they transformed despair into determination. The 332nd Fighter Group, known for their iconic red-tailed planes, had flown countless missions, protecting bombers and earning respect through their unparalleled success. They were more than just pilots. They were symbols of resilience and courage. Even within the confines of enemy encampments, whispers of their prowess spread like wildfire. German pilots, accustomed to the supremacy of their Luftwaffe, found themselves unnerved by the skill and tenacity of the Red Tails. Reports from the front lines revealed a shift in tone. These were no longer just black pilots, they were formidable adversaries. Accounts suggested that their tactics, honed through rigorous training at Tuskegee, had caught even the most seasoned German aviators off guard. If you want to discover more stories like this one, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. As the war raged on, the Germans began to describe the Tuskegee Airmen with a mix of respect and fear. "They fly like demons," one pilot recounted, his voice betraying a hint of admiration. "They protect their bombers with a ferocity we did not expect." This was a turning point. For the first time, the Nazis were no longer viewing the African-American pilots through a lens of racial prejudice, but rather as legitimate threats to their aerial supremacy. The Tuskegee Airmen's success in protecting bombers became legendary. They escorted missions over Germany, where the stakes were high and the opposition fierce. With each successful mission, their reputation grew. As they racked up victories without losing a single bomber, the German pilots began to strategize anew, adjusting their tactics in a desperate attempt to counter the effectiveness of their adversaries. Back in America, the pilots reveled in their accomplishments. They were not just fighting for victory, they were fighting for recognition. Each flight was a statement, a challenge to the systemic racism that had long placed them at the margins of society. They embodied the belief that skill and valor transcended color, proving that they were more than capable of defending their country. However, the psychological impact of the Red Tails extended beyond the battlefield. German pilots, once confident in their aerial dominance, found themselves second-guessing their maneuvers. "We feared them," one German ace admitted in a post-war interview. "They were not only skilled, they were relentless. They knew how to work as a unit, unlike any other squadron we faced." This newfound respect transformed the dynamics of aerial warfare, as the Tuskegee Airmen not only fought for their nation, but also fought against the prejudice that had long plagued their existence. As the war drew to a close, the legacy of the Tuskegee Airmen was solidified. They had proven time and again that they were not only capable pilots but also heroes, whose courage would pave the way for future generations. The fear they instilled in their enemies was a testament to their skill, and their story became one of triumph over adversity. In the annals of history, the Tuskegee Airmen emerged as icons, not just for their valor in combat, but for their unwavering spirit in the face of discrimination. They changed the narrative, inspiring countless individuals to challenge the status quo and believe in the power of equality, respect, and courage. Their legacy would serve as a reminder that true strength knows no color, and in the skies they were all equals, fighting for freedom and justice. As the Tuskegee Airmen continued their relentless pursuit of excellence, their reputation soared across the Allied forces. The once skeptical commanding officers who doubted their capabilities began to recognize their extraordinary performance. The narrative shifted from one of doubt to one of admiration. The Red Tails became a symbol of hope and resilience, not only for African-American soldiers, but for all who believed in the fight against tyranny. In the German Luftwaffe, the shift in the aerial battlefield was palpable. German pilots, used to dominating their adversaries, found themselves grappling with an unexpected challenge. The The Red Tails employed tactics that confounded their opponents, utilizing an intricate understanding of formation flying that allowed them to protect their bombers effectively. They flew as one unit, a cohesive force that was difficult to penetrate, noted a German pilot, reflecting on the unique strategies employed by the Tuskegee Airmen. This realization created an atmosphere of uncertainty and fear among German squadrons. As the war raged on, the Tuskegee Airmen participated in some of the most crucial missions over Europe, including the bombing raids over Germany. They flew into hostile territories with unwavering confidence, knowing that their capabilities as pilots were no longer in question. Each successful mission further solidified their position in the annals of military history. The psychological warfare waged by the Red Tails extended to the enemy's morale. Reports circulated among German pilots about the prowess of the Tuskegee Airmen, leading to a distinct shift in their approach. "We would strategize around them," revealed a German commander. "It was as if we were fighting not just against pilots but against a movement. They represented something larger than themselves." This commentary revealed a profound respect, a grudging acknowledgement of the airmen's impact that transcended mere aerial combat. Back home, the legacy of the Tuskegee Airmen began to take shape in ways that would resonate for decades. Their extraordinary achievements prompted discussions about civil rights and equality, igniting a spark in the hearts of many who had long been marginalized. The pilots became role models, inspiring a generation to dream beyond the constraints of race and societal expectations. Schools began to teach their story, and their contributions were recognized in both military and civilian spheres. As the war drew to a close in 1945, the Tuskegee Airmen returned home, not just as soldiers, but as heroes. Their accomplishments were celebrated in parades, and they were awarded numerous accolades, including the Distinguished Flying Cross. Yet they were acutely aware that their fight was not over. The barriers of discrimination still loomed large in their post-war lives. Many returned to a country that had yet to fully embrace their sacrifices, yet they remained undeterred. In the years that followed, the Tuskegee Airmen became advocates for civil rights, using their experiences to challenge the status quo. They were not just pilots, they were catalysts for change, urging society to confront its prejudices and acknowledge the power of diversity. Their legacy continued to grow, influencing legislation and reshaping public perception. The fear that once gripped the hearts of German pilots transformed into a profound respect that echoed through history. The Tuskegee Airmen had not only changed the course of the war, they had altered the narrative of race in America. Their story became a powerful testament to courage, skill, and the enduring fight for equality, reminding future generations that true valor knows no color. In the skies, as in life, they had emerged as equals, champions for freedom and justice, forever altering the course of history. As the Tuskegee Airmen returned to civilian life, their impact extended beyond the military sphere. They found themselves at the forefront of a growing movement for civil rights, leveraging their wartime experiences to advocate for equality at home. Their stories resonated with a broader audience, igniting discussions about racism and justice across the nation. In the years following the war, many of the pilots took on roles in various industries, using their education and skills to break barriers in fields previously dominated by white Americans. Charles Anderson, for instance, became an influential figure in aviation, mentoring young pilots and inspiring them to pursue careers in a field that had once denied them access. His efforts, alongside those of his fellow airmen, helped to create scholarship programs aimed at encouraging African Americans to enter aviation and engineering, fields that had long been unwelcoming to people of color. The memory of their exploits in the skies lingered in the minds of those who had faced them. German pilots, once terrified of the red-tail angels, began to reflect on their experiences with the Tuskegee Airmen. As the war faded into history, many were surprised by the skill and tenacity of these black pilots, attributes that had shattered their preconceptions and prejudices. The fear they had harbored turned into a grudging respect, as stories of the airmen's unwavering commitment to their missions and their ability to protect bombers became legendary among former adversaries. In post-war Germany, some pilots began to share their encounters with the Tuskegee Airmen, recounting tales of intense dogfights and the unexpected resilience of the black pilots. Meetings and reunions of former combatants emerged, where they exchanged stories that transcended the divides of race and nationality. These gatherings became a platform for reconciliation, where the shared experiences of war fostered understanding and respect. In the United States, the Tuskegee Airmen's legacy found its way into the civil rights movement. Their achievements inspired younger generations to challenge segregation and discrimination, leading to significant milestones like the integration of schools and public facilities. Figures such as Martin Luther King Jr. often referenced the airmen in their speeches, using their story as a beacon of hope and determination in the fight for equality. As the 1960s dawned, the airmen were called upon once more, this time not to fight in the skies, but to lend their voices to a movement that sought to dismantle systemic racism. They participated in marches, rallies, and community meetings, sharing their first-hand accounts of discrimination and resilience. Their presence commanded attention as they embodied the promise of a just society where one's character and abilities, rather than their race, dictated their place in the world. In 1972, the Tuskegee Airmen received a long-overdue acknowledgement when they were awarded the Congressional Gold Medal, a symbol of their contributions and sacrifices. The ceremony was attended by veterans and young activists alike, bridging the gap between past and present struggles for justice. As they stood together, a new generation of leaders looked to the airmen, drawing inspiration from their courage and determination. The legacy of the Tuskegee Airmen transcended the battlefield. It became a narrative woven into the fabric of American history. They transformed fear into respect, and their story became a cornerstone for discussions around race, equality, and justice. Each flight they undertook was a testament to their skill, and each battle fought was a step toward a future where all individuals could soar, unencumbered by the chains of prejudice. In the end, the Tuskegee Airmen emerged not just as pilots, but as symbols of resilience and change, their courage echoing through the ages as a reminder that the fight for equality is an ongoing journey, one that requires the strength of many to achieve true freedom for all. As the war raged on in Europe, the reputation of the Tuskegee Airmen began to seep into the psyche of their adversaries. German pilots, initially dismissive of their capabilities, found themselves increasingly unnerved by the consistently effective performance of the 332nd Fighter Group. Reports from the front lines began to circulate among Luftwaffe ranks, detailing encounters with the Red Tail Angels. The narrative shifted from mere skepticism to a palpable fear. These were not just ordinary pilots, but skilled warriors who consistently outmaneuvered and outsmarted their foes. The turning point came during a critical mission over Italy, where the 332nd was tasked with escorting a fleet of bombers deep into enemy territory. German intelligence had been monitoring the performance of the Red Tails, and when the Luftwaffe received word of their participation, it sent ripples of anxiety among the ranks. Pilots who had previously faced them spoke of their precision and discipline, qualities that were not commonly attributed to African-American aviators in the entrenched racist ideologies of the time. For these seasoned German pilots, the fear stemmed not only from the skill of the Tuskegee Airmen, but also from the possibility of losing to a group they had been conditioned to underestimate. On that fateful day, as the P-51 Mustangs soared through the skies, the German pilots were confronted with a reality they had not anticipated. The Red Tails executed their new combat doctrine flawlessly, forming a protective barrier around the bombers. The coordination and tactical awareness displayed by the Tuskegee pilots made it evident that they had mastered the art of aerial warfare. As the first German aircraft appeared on the horizon, anticipation morphed into dread. The Tuskegee Airmen engaged with a fierce determination, proving their mettle in the face of overwhelming odds. After the mission, the Luftwaffe issued a stark assessment. The Red Tails were no longer to be viewed as mere adversaries, but as formidable opponents that required new strategies. Pilots returned from combat with stories of their encounters, recounting how the Red Tails seemed to anticipate their maneuvers, cutting through the air with an elegance that belied the hardships they had endured during training. This shift in perception was not merely about combat effectiveness. It represented a crack in the facade of racial superiority that had long dominated the German military psyche. Back at home, the impact of the Tuskegee Airmen's success resonated beyond the battlefield. Families of pilots and the African-American community at large began to feel a swell of pride and empowerment. The narratives of bravery and skill began to redefine what it meant to be a black man in America. In meetings and community gatherings, stories of the Red Tails circulated like wildfire, igniting discussions about civil rights and equality. The pilots became symbols of hope, showcasing that talent and capability were not confined by the color of one's skin. As the war drew to a close, the legacy of the Tuskegee Airmen was firmly etched into the annals of history. Their contributions had altered perceptions not just in the skies over Europe, but also at home, paving the way for future generations to challenge the status quo. The pilots returned not only as heroes of the war, but as pivotal figures in the ongoing struggle for civil rights. Their experiences and triumphs laid the groundwork for a broader fight against systemic racism, inspiring movements that sought to dismantle the very barriers they had faced. In the years that followed, the narrative of the Tuskegee Airmen was honored in schools, documentaries, and eventually in the halls of Congress. The Congressional Gold Medal, awarded in 1972, was merely a symbol of their profound impact, but the true essence of their legacy lived on in the hearts of those who fought for equality, justice, and a future where everyone could soar, unencumbered by prejudice. Their story became a testament to the power of resilience, forever reminding the world that courage knows no color and that true valor transcends the boundaries of race. As the Tuskegee Airmen solidified their reputation as skilled aviators, the German pilots began to take notice. Initially dismissive, they had regarded the African-American pilots with skepticism, fueled by a mixture of prejudice and underestimation. However, as the Red Tails continued to thwart their expectations, the narrative shifted dramatically. German intelligence reports, which initially characterized the 332nd Fighter Group as an unworthy adversary, began to reflect the growing unease among the Luftwaffe pilots. They noted how the Red Tails employed tactics that were not only effective, but also innovative, often surprising their opponents with their strategic prowess. The pilots of the 332nd had developed a reputation for their disciplined formation, flying, and aggressive defense of bombers, which was unlike anything the Germans had anticipated from a group they had been led to believe would falter in the skies. Stories circulated among the German ranks, whispers of the Red Tail Angels as they were now dubbed. The pilots spoke of their precision, their ability to coordinate strikes, and most importantly, their fearlessness in the face of danger. German pilots began to express a palpable fear of encountering these men in the air as their previous overconfidence crumbled under the weight of reality. Reports indicated that some Luftwaffe pilots even hesitated to engage in dogfights against the Red Tails, fearing not just the loss of their aircraft but the potential for personal disgrace at the hands of a group they had once deemed inferior. The psychological warfare waged by the Tuskegee Airmen extended beyond the physical realm of combat. As their successes mounted, the Red Tails became symbols of defiance against the prevailing racial stereotypes held by their enemies. The very notion that black pilots could not only compete but excel against the best of the Luftwaffe unnerved the German command. Their fear was not solely about aerial prowess. It was about the broader implications of a changing narrative. The airmen's success in the face of adversity threatened to unravel the fabric of the ideology that had justified their own prejudices. Back in the United States, the impact of the Tuskegee Airmen's achievements resonated deeply within the African-American community. The pilots returned home not just as veterans, but as icons of resilience. Their stories became a rallying cry, inspiring young black men and women to pursue their dreams with vigor, shattering the glass ceilings that had long confined them. They held speaking engagements, sharing their experiences and emphasizing the importance of perseverance and belief in oneself. The recognition of their contributions began to extend beyond mere accolades. The narratives of the Red Tails were integrated into the national consciousness, becoming a pivotal part of educational curricula. Schools across the country began to honor their legacy, teaching students about the intersection of bravery, skill, and the fight against racial injustice. The pilots became role models, proving that excellence could not be defined by skin color. As civil rights movements gained momentum in the decades following the war, the Tuskegee Airmen were at the forefront advocating for equality and justice. Their collective experiences and the challenges they faced in the military became a potent example of the systemic barriers that needed dismantling. They were often called upon to lend their voices to the cause, sharing their stories in hopes of inspiring others to continue the fight for civil rights. In the years that followed, documentaries and films began to emerge, chronicling the legacy of the Tuskegee Airmen. The narrative of their bravery, skill, and determination captured the hearts of new generations, reminding them that the path to equality was paved with the sacrifices of those who dared to challenge the status quo. The fear that once gripped the hearts of their enemies now served as a testament to their undeniable impact, a stark reminder that true courage knows no bounds, and that the skies were meant for all who dared to fly. As the Tuskegee Airmen continued to make their mark in the skies over Europe, the narratives of their German adversaries began to surface, revealing a complex tapestry of fear and respect. Reports from the Luftwaffe pilots painted a vivid picture of the Red Tails. They were not merely men of color in a segregated military. They were fierce, skilled combatants who shattered the preconceived notions held by their enemies. In the wake of their successful missions, German pilots began to communicate their observations about the 332nd Fighter Group. They noted the tactical acumen with which the Red Tails executed their missions. The disciplined formation, flying, and strategic maneuvers were unlike anything they had encountered from other Allied groups. The Germans realized that the Red Tails were not just another squadron to be underestimated. They were formidable opponents who fought with a tenacity that caught them off guard. Reports from the front lines indicated a growing dread among German pilots whenever they spotted the distinctive red tails of the P-51 Mustangs. The psychological impact of the Tuskegee Airmen's success extended beyond the battlefield. The fear that arose from their prowess began to seep into the narratives of German soldiers, creating a mythos around the Red Tails that only heightened their reputation. Tales circulated among the Luftwaffe ranks about how these pilots seemed to defy the odds, protecting bombers with an almost supernatural skill. Such stories transformed the Red Tails into an enigmatic force, further solidifying their place in the lore of the war. As the conflict raged on, the Red Tails became not only symbols of excellence in aerial combat, but also potent symbols of hope for the African-American community back home. Their accomplishments were a beacon of possibility, challenging the racial barriers that had long confined black men to the margins of society. The pilots often spoke of their dual fight, one against the enemy in the skies and another against the prejudice that sought to define their worth. Back in the United States, the impact of the Tuskegee Airmen's success rippled through the civil rights movement. Their achievements garnered attention from influential leaders and activists who recognized the significance of their struggle. The airmen became integral to discussions about desegregation in the military and society at large. The realization that these pilots, once doubted and marginalized, could achieve greatness in the face of adversity sparked a renewed commitment to equality across the nation. As the war drew to a close, the Red Tails returned home, not just as veterans but as icons of change. They were celebrated in parades and honored in speeches, their legacy firmly etched in the annals of American history. Yet the true battle had only just begun. The pilots understood that their fight for justice extended beyond the confines of the battlefield. They became advocates for the very rights they had defended in the skies, pushing for desegregation and equality in all facets of life. In the years that followed, their stories were not just told, they were woven into the fabric of American identity. Documentaries and films chronicling their journey emerged, inspiring countless individuals to champion the cause of civil rights. The once feared Red Tails transformed into symbols of resilience and determination, proving that the skies were for all who dared to challenge the status quo. Their legacy served as a powerful reminder that courage knows no bounds, and that the fight for justice is a journey worth undertaking. As the Tuskegee Airmen solidified their reputation in the skies, their presence began to instill a unique sense of fear among enemy pilots, particularly the German Luftwaffe. The Red Tails' strategic prowess and disciplined formations were becoming legendary, altering the dynamics of air combat. German pilots, accustomed to overwhelming their adversaries, found themselves facing an enemy that not only matched their skills, but often surpassed them through ingenuity and teamwork. In the midst of this, a group of seasoned German pilots convened to discuss the rising threat posed by the 322nd Fighter Group. They shared accounts of encounters with the Red Tails, each story dripping with a mix of disbelief and admiration. "They fly with a tenacity we've rarely seen," one pilot remarked, recounting a skirmish where the Red Tails had outmaneuvered a group of Messerschmitts. "It's as if they anticipate our moves before we make them." Their fear was not solely rooted in the pilot's skills. It was compounded by the psychological impact of facing a force that represented both military prowess and a challenge to the racial ideologies that permeated their society. The Tuskegee Airmen embodied a contradiction to the Nazi perception of superiority. They were not just black pilots, they were a united front that challenged the very core of the Aryan supremacy narrative. This realization unnerved the Luftwaffe pilots, who began to question their own beliefs about race and capability. As the conflict intensified, reports began circulating in the Luftwaffe that the Red Tails were not only skilled flyers, but also carried a reputation for their unwavering bravery. German pilots noted the meticulous manner in which the Tuskegee Airmen executed their missions, often returning to base with their aircraft intact while providing cover for bombers. This not only shattered their preconceived notions of black pilots as inferior, but also elevated the fear factor. The Red Tails were no longer just another squadron, they were a force to be reckoned with. On the other side of the Atlantic, the US military took notice of the psychological warfare unfolding in the skies. The successes of the 332nd inspired an even greater campaign to leverage their notoriety. Allied forces shared stories of the Red Tails' achievements, framing them as symbols of hope and resilience. This narrative was further amplified by the media, which began to portray the airmen not just as fighters, but as pioneers of change, capable of altering perceptions on both sides of the ocean. Back at home, the pilots themselves were acutely aware of the dual significance of their missions. Every successful sortie was a strike against the prejudice they faced, both in the military and in society. They understood that their aerial triumphs were paving the way for future generations, fighting not just against enemy aircraft, but against the systemic barriers that had long held them back. With each mission, they were rewriting the narrative, proving that skill and valor were not dictated by race. As the war progressed, the fear that the Red Tails instilled in their adversaries began to transform into respect. German pilots started to acknowledge their opponents with a newfound reverence. "These men fly with honor," one recorded in his journal, reflecting on the intensity of the dogfights. "They fight not just for victory, but for their place in history." This shift in perception was palpable among the troops. The Red Tails' growing legend was impacting morale on the ground, inspiring not only their fellow American soldiers, but also the African American community back home, who rallied around their achievements as a beacon of hope. The airmen became symbols of a fight that extended well beyond the battlefield, representing the struggle for equality and justice in a deeply divided nation. As the war drew to a close, the Tuskegee Airmen returned not only as veterans, but as pioneers who had reshaped the landscape of aerial combat and civil rights. Their legacy lived on, not just in the annals of military history, but in the hearts of those who dared to dream of a better, more inclusive future. The airmen had proven that courage knows no color, and that true valor lies in the fight for justice, inspiring countless others to continue the journey they had begun. As the conflict raged on over Europe, the Tuskegee Airmen found themselves not just participating in missions, but shaping the very fabric of aerial warfare. Their reputation as the Red Tail Angels spread far and wide, creating an almost mythical aura around their capabilities. The narrative surrounding them began to shift dramatically, not just among American forces, but also within the ranks of the Luftwaffe. German pilots who once dismissed the African-American flyers as inferior began to reassess their positions. No longer were they just facing a squadron. They were up against a relentless force that flew with an unparalleled tenacity. Among the Luftwaffe, a growing number of pilots expressed unease when assigned to face the Red Tails. The tales of their daring maneuvers and strategic brilliance circulated quickly through the German ranks. One such pilot, Hans Müller, captured the sentiment in a clandestine letter to his wife, lamenting the change in dynamics. "We used to expect an easy fight when we saw the Americans," he wrote, "but these men, they have something to prove, and they fly with a fury that is unsettling. They are not just fighting for their country, they are fighting for their dignity." This psychological warfare had its roots in the broader context of the civil rights movement, a struggle that transcended the Atlantic. The airmen's determination resonated with African Americans at home, who saw in them a reflection of their own battles against oppression. Communities rallied, organizing events to celebrate their achievements. The airmen had become spokesmen for a cause much larger than themselves, embodying the dreams of a generation yearning for equality. Their very presence in the skies over Europe was a statement. They were a testament to the power of resilience and courage. As the Allies pushed further into enemy territory, the Tuskegee Airmen faced new challenges. The pilots of the 392nd were not just tasked with escorting bombers, they were also called upon to engage in ground support missions. During one such mission in the spring of 1945, they were assigned to provide air cover for ground troops advancing towards a key strategic location. The stakes were high, and the tension was palpable. In the midst of this operation, a fierce dogfight erupted. The Red Tails, flying their P-51 Mustangs, engaged a squadron of German fighters in a battle that would become legendary. The air was filled with the roar of engines and the crackle of gunfire as they maneuvered with precision, showcasing the tactics honed under Colonel Davis's command. It was in this moment that the German pilots, who had come to fear the Red Tails, learned the hard truth of their prowess. The skill and bravery displayed by the Tuskegee Airmen were undeniable, and they emerged victorious once again. With each mission, the Tuskegee Airmen not only proved their military worth, but also dismantled the stereotypes that had long plagued them. Their every success in the air served as a blow against the racism entrenched in society. The German pilots, who once believed they were superior, had to reckon with the reality of their opponents. The conversations among the Luftwaffe changed from condescension to concern. They acknowledged that the Red Tails were not just formidable adversaries. They were a symbol of resilience that could not be easily vanquished. As the war drew to an end, with the fall of Berlin in sight, the legacy of the Tuskegee Airmen became firmly established. They returned home not merely as heroes of war, but as catalysts for change. Their experiences in the cockpit translated into a louder voice for civil rights. The nation, grappling with its own contradictions, began to realize that the fight for equality was far from over. The airmen had set the stage for a future where courage and determination could rewrite the narrative of a bow nation. The fear that the German pilots once harbored transformed into a profound respect, marking a turning point in how bravery was perceived across borders. Back in the United States, the airmen inspired a movement that would echo through the decades, proving that in the face of adversity, the human spirit could rise above the limitations imposed by prejudice. Their journey, marked by struggle and triumph, became an indelible part of history, reminding all that true valor knows no boundaries. As the war continued to rage across Europe, the Tuskegee Airmen found themselves at the forefront of not only military conflict, but also a broader societal transformation. Their success in the skies had begun to chip away at the deeply rooted prejudices that defined not only military hierarchies, but American society as a whole. For the German pilots, the realization that these men, once seen as inferior, could outperform them in combat led to a seismic shift in perspective. The Luftwaffe pilots began to share accounts of their encounters with the Red Tails that bordered on reverence, a stark contrast to the dismissive attitude they had initially held. In the aftermath of each successful mission, the airmen returned to Tuskegee, where they were met with the cheers of their community. These moments were more than mere celebrations. They were affirmations of identity and pride. Each flight instilled a sense of purpose, reinforcing their belief that they were not just fighting for victory, but for the recognition of their worth as individuals and as members of a community long marginalized. The Tuskegee Airmen were becoming symbols of hope, and their growing legend was beginning to reach the ears of influential leaders back home. As the Allies advanced, President Franklin D. Roosevelt began to take note of the airmen's achievements. He publicly praised the 332nd Fighter Group, which not only bolstered the morale of African Americans across the nation, but also put pressure on military leaders to reassess the role of black servicemen in combat. The airmen's successes were no longer seen as mere anomalies. They were tangible proof that capability transcended race. This change in narrative was pivotal, igniting discussions in Congress about integration in the armed forces. The German pilots, shaken by the Red Tails' prowess, started to adapt their strategies. They recognized that they could no longer underestimate their opponents. Intelligence reports began to mention the high level of skill exhibited by the Tuskegee pilots, prompting a change in tactics to counter their effectiveness. The fear that once paralyzed them morphed into a strategic calculation. The Red Tails were not just fighters. They were a formidable force that demanded respect. As the war neared its climax, the Tuskegee Airmen were tasked with increasingly critical missions, including the protection of Allied ground troops and strategic bombing campaigns. Each successful operation reinforced their reputation, and the moniker Red Tail Angels became synonymous with precision and bravery. The combination of their skills, courage, and the support of their community began to transform public perception further, leading to an awakening that resonated far beyond the war. In the final months of the conflict, the airmen were privy to a momentous encounter during a joint operation with other Allied forces. They shared the skies with white pilots who, inspired by the Tuskegee Airmen's legacy, began to embrace a newfound camaraderie. The barriers that had once divided them began to dissolve, replaced by mutual respect forged in the fires of combat. This collaboration laid the groundwork for a post-war environment that would challenge the status quo. As the dust settled over war-torn Europe, the airmen returned home, not just as veterans, but as pioneers of change. Their stories, laden with both grief and glory, became catalysts for the burgeoning civil rights movement. The fear that had once gripped their German adversaries now served as a testament to their undeniable impact. They had not only altered the course of the war, but had also sown the seeds for a future where racial equality could bloom. The Tuskegee Airmen's legacy transcended their military achievements. They had redefined bravery, shattered stereotypes, and forged connections that would inspire generations. Their journey was a reminder that true valor knows no color, and in the face of adversity, the human spirit could rise above all odds, shaping a narrative that would echo through history. As they looked toward the future, they knew their fight for justice was far from over, but they were ready to take to the skies once more, this time not just for their country, but for the promise of equality for all. As the Tuskegee Airmen returned to the United States, their triumphs in the skies began to ripple through the fabric of American society. The fear that had gripped their German adversaries, who had once dismissed them as mere novelties, now transformed into a grudging respect. Accounts from downed enemy pilots captured during the war recounted their astonishment at the skill, discipline, and bravery exhibited by the Red Tail Angels. These narratives traveled back to Germany, where they stirred conversations among the Luftwaffe. The realization that American pilots could excel in combat challenged ingrained prejudices, sowing doubt among those who had once believed in their superiority. Back home, the Tuskegee Airmen faced a different battle. Despite their heroic service, they returned to a country still grappling with systemic racism. The E4 medals they earned and the accolades that followed did little to change the hearts of those who viewed them as less than equal. Yet, the airmen were undeterred. They understood that their contributions on the battlefield were part of a larger fight for civil rights. They began to actively engage in discussions about equality, leveraging their experiences to advocate for change. As they shared their stories at rallies and community meetings, the airmen became symbols of hope for a generation longing for justice. Their narrative, intertwined with the broader civil rights movement, emphasized the importance of courage, not just in the face of enemy fire, but against the societal norms that sought to suppress them. The legacy of their flight missions became a rallying cry for activists who took to the streets, demanding an end to segregation and discrimination. In this climate of change, the Tuskegee Airmen found allies among other veterans, including those who had fought alongside them in Europe. White pilots who had shared the skies began to speak out, acknowledging the contributions and sacrifices made by their black counterparts. The friendships forged in combat led to joint efforts to dismantle the barriers of inequality back home. Together, they organized events and forums to address racial issues, highlighting the absurdity of segregation in a nation that prided itself on freedom and democracy. As the 1950s approached, the Tuskegee Airmen's impact was palpable. Their bravery had sparked a movement that sought not only to honor their service, but also to effect real change. The military began to slowly integrate its forces, culminating in President Harry Truman's executive order in 1948 to desegregate the armed forces. The airmen had played a crucial role in this shift, their achievements serving as undeniable evidence that capability was not determined by race. In the years that followed, many of the airmen took on leadership roles within their communities, becoming educators, politicians, and activists. Their commitment to advocating for equality echoed through the halls of history, inspiring countless others to join the fight. The stories of their aerial conquests became intertwined with narratives of social justice, serving as a reminder that the battles fought in the air were merely reflections of the struggles on the ground. As the nation moved toward the civil rights era, the Tuskegee Airmen stood as a testament to the power of perseverance and courage in the face of adversity. The fear once felt by their German opponents had transformed into a legacy of inspiration. The airmen had not only challenged the perceptions of their time, but had also laid the groundwork for a future where the skies and society could be shared equally by all. Their journey, marked by both valor and vulnerability, illuminated a path forward, one where the fight for justice continued, ensuring that the lessons learned in the war would not be forgotten in the peace that followed. As the war drew to a close, the Tuskegee Airmen's reputation extended far beyond the confines of the battlefield. Their prowess in the sky not only reshaped military strategies, but also began to challenge deeply ingrained societal prejudices. German pilots, initially dismissive of their black counterparts, found themselves reassessing their beliefs. The tales of encounters with the red-tail angels spread through the Luftwaffe, igniting a mixture of respect and fear. They spoke of the airmen's relentless determination and tactical ingenuity, which defied the stereotypes they had long held. Among the German pilots, one man, Oberleutnant Klaus Richter, became particularly obsessed with the stories circulating in the mess halls about the Tuskegee pilots. Initially, he had dismissed them as mere propaganda, but after a few skirmishes, he found himself in a precarious position during a bombing raid. Faced with a squadron of P-51 Mustangs, he could not shake the feeling that he was up against more than just skilled aviators. He was confronting a legacy of resistance and resilience that had begun to penetrate the very core of German air superiority. Richter's encounters with the Tuskegee Airmen haunted him. He remembered the swift maneuvers and the precision with which they executed their missions. In a fateful dogfight, he had nearly lost his wingman to a red-tailed fighter that seemed to anticipate their every move. The psychological impact of these confrontations was profound. The once casual dismissals among his peers gave way to somber discussions about the implications of their encounters. Each victory claimed by the airmen chipped away at the image of white supremacy that had governed their understanding of combat prowess. In the aftermath of the war, as the Allies took stock of their victories and losses, the Tuskegee Airmen emerged not just as military heroes, but as symbols of change. Their contributions were not easily forgotten. They were celebrated in parades and commemorative events, both domestically and internationally. The narratives surrounding their bravery began to shift public perception, sparking conversations that transcended military achievements and entered the realm of civil rights. At home, the airmen became catalysts for social change, advocating for equal rights and justice. Their experiences and the discrimination they faced in the military fueled their resolve to ensure that the injustices they encountered would not persist in the post-war era. Many of them took leadership roles in civil rights organizations, sharing their stories of valor to inspire younger generations to fight against racial inequality. Their efforts were critical in galvanizing support for the burgeoning civil rights movement, as they used their status as war heroes to challenge the systemic racism that remained entrenched in American society. Richter, now a civilian grappling with the aftermath of the war, found himself reflecting on the lessons he had learned from his adversaries. He began writing articles for German publications, recounting his experiences and advocating for reconciliation. His articles highlighted the bravery of the Tuskegee Airmen and urged his fellow citizens to confront the biases that had led to the conflict. In an unexpected twist, he reached out to several surviving members of the 332nd Fighter Group, igniting a dialogue that had once seemed impossible. Through letters and eventual face-to-face meetings, a bridge was built between former enemies. These interactions were not merely discussions of past battles. They became a platform for shared understanding and reflection on the war's broader implications. As they exchanged stories, the Tuskegee Airmen and the German pilots forged a bond rooted in mutual respect, recognizing that their struggles had shaped their lives in profound ways. Thus, the legacy of the Tuskegee Airmen extended beyond the skies of World War II. Their impact rippled through history, influencing not only military policy and racial equality, but also fostering an unexpected camaraderie that transcended national borders. The pilots who, once inspired terror in their adversaries, had become symbols of hope, unity, and the relentless pursuit of justice in a world still grappling with its past. As Richter delved deeper into his correspondence with the Tuskegee Airmen, he began to understand the complexities of their experiences. Each letter revealed not just tales of aerial skirmishes, but also the resilience born from facing prejudice and adversity. He learned about the relentless training at Tuskegee, the skepticism they faced from their own military leaders, and the overarching societal expectations that sought to diminish their achievements. It was a stark contrast to the pride he had felt as a pilot, a pride that was now tainted by the realization of the biases that had fueled the war. Among the Tuskegee Airmen, one name stood out: Charles McGee. A veteran who had flown numerous missions, McGee's stories resonated with Richter. In one letter, McGee recounted a particularly harrowing encounter where they had to protect a fleet of bombers against overwhelming enemy forces. He wrote about the camaraderie he felt with his fellow pilots, their shared determination to succeed against the odds, and how they transformed fear into a weapon of their own. Richter was captivated by this spirit, how these men, often underestimated, had turned the tables on their adversaries. Inspired by McGee's words, Richter decided to organize a gathering. He envisioned an event that would bring together former pilots, both American and German, to share their stories publicly. He reached out to local universities and veteran organizations, advocating for a conversation that would bridge the gap between their histories. Many were skeptical, recalling the animosity that had existed during the war, but Richter remained steadfast. He saw this as an opportunity for healing, for understanding, and for rectifying the misconceptions that had long defined their narratives. When the day of the event arrived, the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. Veterans from both sides, along with families and curious onlookers, filled the auditorium. Richter opened the session by sharing his own journey, his initial fears when encountering the Tuskegee pilots, and how those feelings had transformed through their correspondence. He introduced McGee as a guest speaker, and the audience erupted in applause, recognizing the legacy he represented. McGee spoke with passion, recounting not only the triumphs but also the trials faced by the Tuskegee Airmen. He emphasized the importance of recognizing the humanity in one another, regardless of the uniform worn. His words resonated deeply, and as he spoke of bravery, respect, and the quest for justice, the audience felt a palpable shift in the room. Following McGee, a former Luftwaffe pilot shared his perspective, reflecting on the fear that the Red Tails had instilled in his squadron. He described the strategic changes that had to be made in response to their prowess in the skies, acknowledging the prejudice that had clouded their judgment and the respect that had ultimately developed. His honesty sparked a dialogue that flowed naturally, with veterans voicing their regrets, their hopes for future generations, and their shared desire for a world free from discrimination. As the event concluded, attendees were left with more than just stories of air combat. They had witnessed a powerful reconciliation. Richter realized that the legacy of the Tuskegee Airmen was not simply about their military achievements, but about their role as catalysts for change. The conversations that day served as a reminder that history is not just a series of battles fought in the skies, but a struggle for understanding and equality on the ground. The bond forged between the former adversaries became a testament to the power of dialogue. Richter continued to facilitate these meetings, and over time they evolved into a broader initiative. Workshops, educational programs, and public discussions emerged, all aimed at fostering unity and respect among diverse communities. The Tuskegee Airmen, once feared by their enemies, had become beacons of hope, reminding everyone that courage can take many forms and that the fight for justice is a journey worth undertaking together. As Richter continued to facilitate these gatherings, a new dimension emerged in the dialogue surrounding the Tuskegee Airmen. The once hostile German pilots began to share not only their experiences in combat, but also their personal transformations. They recounted how their encounters with the Red Tails had shattered long-held beliefs, forcing them to confront the contradictions of their own upbringing in a society steeped in racial prejudice. One afternoon, during a particularly poignant workshop, a former Luftwaffe pilot named Klaus Müller stepped forward. With a trembling voice, he spoke about his first encounter with the Tuskegee pilots in the skies over Italy. "We were told to expect incompetence," he began, his gaze drifting to the floor. "But what I saw were men who fought with unparalleled skill. They maneuvered their aircraft like dancers, and it struck terror in our hearts." As he shared his recollections, Klaus explained how the fear of being outmatched pushed him to rethink his views on race and capability. "It was in those moments of battle that I realized we had been wrong. These men were not just fighting for their country, they were fighting for their dignity, and they were winning." The audience listened intently, and a palpable sense of empathy filled the room. Young veterans began to ask questions, seeking to understand the depth of their experiences and the implications of their shared history. One African-American veteran, inspired by Klaus's vulnerability, spoke of the prejudice he faced during his own service and how the legacy of the Tuskegee Airmen had been a source of pride and strength for him and his peers. As these conversations unfolded, Richter recognized an opportunity to broaden the initiative's scope. He proposed a collaborative project, a documentary film that would capture the stories of both the Tuskegee Airmen and their former adversaries. The idea sparked enthusiasm, and soon a diverse team of filmmakers, historians, and community leaders came together to ensure that the narrative would reflect the complexity of their shared past. The film incorporated interviews with surviving Tuskegee Airmen who recounted their struggles and triumphs, and with former German pilots who candidly acknowledged their fears and biases. The project also included reenactments of pivotal air battles, illustrating the skill and bravery of the Red Tails in ways that brought their history to life. As the documentary progressed, it attracted attention from various media outlets, leading to an invitation for a public screening at a prominent film festival. The event became a gathering place for veterans from both sides, their families, and the general public. The anticipation was electric, as many recognized the significance of this moment, a chance to bridge gaps that had persisted for decades. On the night of the screening, the atmosphere was charged with emotion. After the screening, a panel discussion ensued, featuring both Tuskegee Airmen and former German pilots. Their voices intertwined in a dialogue that was both healing and enlightening. They reflected on how their past had shaped their identities and the lessons learned. The audience was invited to participate, and they did so with fervor, asking questions, sharing their own stories, and expressing a desire for continued dialogue. As the event came to a close, Richter stood back, observing the connections being forged. The legacy of the Tuskegee Airmen had transcended the bounds of history, becoming a living testament to the power of understanding and reconciliation. The fear that once existed had evolved into respect, and the shared commitment to combat discrimination and foster unity echoed in the hearts of all present. In the months that followed, the documentary gained traction, leading to educational initiatives in schools across the country. The story of the Tuskegee Airmen, once merely a footnote in history, was now a beacon of inspiration for future generations. The initiative had blossomed beyond Richter's imagination, igniting a movement that championed diversity, inclusion, and the importance of confronting one's biases. In this way, the pilots of Tuskegee and their former adversaries became not just participants in a narrative of war, but architects of a new legacy, one that recognized the value of every individual, regardless of the color of their skin. And as they continued to share their stories, the world moved a step closer to a future defined not by fear, but by understanding and respect. As the documentary began to circulate, it captured not only the attention of history enthusiasts, but also the interest of educators, historians, and community leaders. Schools across the nation started to incorporate the story of the Tuskegee Airmen into their curricula, providing a more nuanced understanding of their heroism and the racial dynamics of the time. Students, inspired by the resilience of the airmen, began to engage in projects and discussions that explored themes of bravery, equality, and the importance of standing against oppression. In Germany, a group of former Luftwaffe pilots, now in their twilight years, gathered for a reunion. The discussions at their gathering were inevitably colored by the documentary that had recently surfaced, detailing the incredible feats of the Tuskegee Airmen. They exchanged stories, some recalling their encounters in the skies, where they had come face to face with the famed Red Tails. The pilots spoke with a mix of admiration and fear, their voices tinged with respect for the skill and determination displayed by their adversaries. One former pilot, Klaus, shared a particularly vivid memory of a dogfight over Italy. "We were trained to expect inferiority," he reflected, shaking his head. "But the moment we engaged with the Red Tails, it became clear that they were not just lucky pilots. They were formidable opponents. Their precision, their strategy, it was as if they anticipated our every move." The group listened intently, acknowledging the truth in Klaus's words. The fear they had felt in the skies was palpable even now years. As the reunion continued, the conversation turned toward the impact of the Tuskegee Airmen on the post-war era. The former Luftwaffe pilots expressed a desire to understand the legacy of the airmen, not only in terms of their military prowess but also their role in the civil rights movement that followed the war. They recognized that the struggle for equality was not just an American issue but a global one, and they felt a responsibility to engage in the dialogue surrounding racism and discrimination in their own country. Inspired by the documentary, Klaus and his fellow pilots decided to take action. They reached out to local schools and community organizations, offering to speak about their experiences and the lessons they had learned. They hoped to foster understanding and healing, paralleling the journey of the Tuskegee Airmen. Their initiative was met with enthusiasm, and soon they found themselves in classrooms discussing not only the tactics of aerial combat, but also the importance of empathy and collaboration across cultural lines. Back in the United States, the movement sparked by the documentary continued to grow. Communities began hosting events celebrating diversity, with panels featuring veterans, historians, and activists. The Tuskegee Airmen became symbols of courage, not only in the military domain, but also in the fight for social justice. Young people, inspired by their story, organized rallies, art, exhibitions, and educational workshops that emphasized the critical nature of understanding history in the context of present-day issues. As the years rolled on, the narrative of the Tuskegee Airmen evolved into a powerful symbol of transformation. Their legacy was not limited to their military achievements. It became a catalyst for dialogue about race, identity, and the ongoing struggle for equality. The fear that had once defined the perceptions of both German pilots and American society was replaced by a collective commitment to understanding and acceptance. In a final act of solidarity, Klaus and the former Luftwaffe pilots traveled to the United States to meet with the surviving airmen and their families. The meeting was filled with emotion, as both sides shared stories, laughter, and even tears. They recognized that the skies that had once divided them were now a testament to their shared humanity. The event culminated in a mutual pledge to work towards a future where respect and understanding would prevail over prejudice and fear. In this way, the legacy of the Tuskegee Airmen continued to inspire generations, reminding all that the flight towards equality requires courage, empathy, and the willingness to confront the past. The story had transformed from one of conflict to one of hope, serving as a beacon guiding society toward a more inclusive and understanding future. The meeting between Klaus and the surviving Tuskegee Airmen became a pivotal moment for reconciliation and understanding. As the two groups exchanged stories, the air was thick with emotion. Each Tuskegee Airman recounted the struggles they faced, not just in the skies, but also on the ground, where they battled the fierce winds of racial prejudice. Klaus in turn shared the pressures and fears that had gripped his own heart as a young pilot, knowing that the men he was sent to fight might also be fighting against the very prejudices that he had witnessed. As the discussions deepened, Klaus revealed a startling truth. Many German pilots had been misled by propaganda that painted the Tuskegee Airmen as inferior adversaries. They were told that their race determined their capability. This narrative had instilled a sense of arrogance among German pilots, leading them to underestimate their opponents. However, the reality of the Tuskegee Airmen, with their unmatched skill and unwavering resolve, shattered that illusion. Klaus admitted that the first encounters with the Red Tails had left many of his comrades terrified. They were not just fighting against a well-trained enemy, they were grappling with the fear that their very beliefs about race and superiority were flawed. In the days that followed, the conversations blossomed into a collaborative project aimed at educating future generations about the lessons learned from the war. Klaus and the Tuskegee Airmen decided to create a documentary that would delve into their shared experiences. highlighting both the combat narratives and the underlying themes of racial tension and transformation. They envisioned a film that would serve as a bridge, connecting the past with the present and emphasizing the importance of empathy and understanding in overcoming deep-seated prejudices. As they began the project, the two groups traveled across the country, visiting schools and community centers, sharing their stories, and engaging with young audiences. The documentary became a dynamic tool for educating youth about the history of the Tuskegee Airmen and the complex legacy of the war. Together, they facilitated discussions that challenged preconceived notions of race and capability, fostering a new generation that valued courage and equality over division. The impact of their collaboration resonated beyond the confines of their initial project. Inspired by the dialogues, young activists began to emerge, using social media platforms to amplify their voices. They organized events that celebrated diversity and highlighted the importance of inclusive narratives in history. The story of the Tuskegee Airmen became a rallying cry for a new movement focused on social justice, reminding everyone that the fight for equality was not confined to a single generation or a single battle. As the documentary premiered at film festivals, it not only captivated audiences, but also sparked a global conversation about race, identity, and the legacy of war. Klaus and the Tuskegee Airmen stood side by side, proud of what they had achieved together. It was a testament to the power of human connection and understanding, showing that even the most divided past could give way to a future forged through empathy and collaboration. The legacy of the Tuskegee Airmen had transcended their military achievements. It had become a beacon of hope, illuminating the path towards a more equitable society. As they looked towards the horizon, both Klaus and the airmen understood that their journey was far from over. The skies they once fought over were now shared in a spirit of unity, challenging others to join in the flight towards a world where respect and understanding reigned supreme.